welcome to Talk to Me with Liv Harrison, the stories behind their success. Growing up an only, I almost said only child, the only girl in my family. I have three brothers and they're all younger. They're actually a lot younger, but growing up the only girl in my household definitely made some personal challenges for myself. I don't know if anybody else saw them or viewed them as challenges, but I did. I really struggled with having these three brothers, not because I didn't love them to pieces. Believe me, they're very well loved. But I definitely longed for those feminine connections that you just couldn't get with a brother. One of my brothers, the one that is closest to me in age, he's 4 years younger. That's how distant I am from my brothers. This poor kid, I would torture him. Oh gosh, there's so many photos. I would dress him up. I would make him into whatever I was doing that day. My brothers have horrible stories about me making them sit in desks because my mother one time inherited these fantastic old schoolhouse type of desks. I mean, oh my gosh, they had to be from the 50s or the 60s. They were just so perfect as to what you think of as the quintessential schoolhouse desk. And we had four of them. And I would make them sit in their desk and I would make them play school. I mean, these guys hate me. This is why today when I call, I think this is why I only get to talk to their wives. I'm just teasing. My brothers are so loving and very kind and very forgiving. My youngest brother, who is 10 years younger than I am, I really dressed up all the time. What's sad is that I look back and I see that was just me wanting to connect with other girls. When I got to a certain age, I started to hear about something called a sleepover. Now, with my family, I have a really huge extended family. I am one of 58 grandchildren. I'm one of the oldest out of the 58. I'm the sixth oldest of 58 grandkids. And yes, we all know what number we are. It's very, very important. And look, you are always trying to have some sort of identity when you come from such a large family. And yes, these are all first cousins. My mother is the oldest of 10, and we take that whole be fruitful and multiply thing really seriously. We like the whole Catholic gamut. So I had grown up sleeping over at my cousins' houses. That was something that was not foreign. Even when I lived in Natchitoches, which the bulk of my childhood was in this small town in Louisiana, from birth until summer before fifth grade. So before I was 10, that's a pretty healthy chunk of childhood. And I remember having sleepovers, very limited though, at certain friends' homes. But it was when I got to Houston and it was when I got into junior high and high school, we would have these epic sleepovers. And when I mean epic, I mean, we're talking 30 kids. And girls, okay. My parents are very traditional. They were not into boy-girl sleepovers, right? Although back in the day, we would have, things at church where, everybody would all camp on the gym floor together and you'd have a boy side and a girl side. Those were called lock-ins. I love how if we changed the name, it's something different. We call a muffin and basically it's a cupcake without icing, but we're like, oh, look, it's a whole new thing. It's a breakfast food. Kind of like that. But these epic sleepovers that would happen in junior high and high school, 30 girls, easy. And my mother hated it. For multiple reasons. One reason was someone was always crying. She used to say that. There was always someone crying at a sleepover. She would also make the joke, it wasn't really a sleepover until someone started crying. And that's fair. That is true. Also, I was a nightmare the next day. Oh my gosh, I couldn't get it together. And if I were to name it, I would name it Sleepover Hangover, which is a little too rhymey for me, but that's what it was. It was like having a hangover. You were no good to anybody. I was grumpy. I was horrible. Oh, it was horrific. However, The parts that I loved about having these big epic sleepovers wasn't the nail polish, wasn't the like Totino's, pizza rolls at 2 a.m. that were always a bad idea. It was the stories that would happen at night. You would have these bonding experiences that you were like, oh, this is so bonding. Like, it was so emo, right? You would get into these great conversations. People would spill the beans. Secrets were said, and it's 4 a.m, so you're delusional. And then, you're at school and you have to act like the next day or, 2 days later. Oh, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a big deal. Or I'm not going to, spill your secret, whatever. There's this code, a sleepover code. What I love about the whole concept of a sleepover is there is this bonding that you get to with people that aren't quote unquote in your family usually. My guest today has taken the concept of the sleepover and she has made it international. She is so impressive, where she got her master's degree, which she got her master's degree in, which when you listen to her story is just really amazing. But this project of hers that she has dedicated her life to has won or has been up for international awards, like the UNESCO award. When you hear about her project, her career with the Global Sleepover, you're going to want to run and buy all the things. It has been such a pleasure and a gift to hear the stories and the connections of my friend, Geeta Raj. Hello. Hi, Geeta. Welcome. How are you doing, friend?
Hi. Oh my gosh, I'm great, Olivia. It's so nice to talk to you again and see you again.
It is so fantastic. And I love that you are in the very, let's just say bustling city. I don't know. That sounds very 1920s of Washington.
Yeah, some people think all the power is here, and some people don't. So I think it depends on how you look at it.
I think that's a very fair assessment of DC.
Yeah.
I love it though. I mean, but you guys just got out of that beautiful season of the cherry blossoms that are in DC, and I got to see those one time, and I tell you what, wow. That is worth it alone. I don't know how long the blossoms stay, but it absolutely gorgeous. The city's gorgeous. DC really is beautiful.
It's always been my favorite city because of its beauty. Their zoning laws. We don't have freeways through the center of DC. So
really?
There's a kind of a belt, what's called the Beltway, which is a circle freeway around the city. So DC proper, there are very strict zoning laws. We don't have billboards. And coming from Houston, growing up there, it's quite a contrast, and it really makes a difference, like just in terms of the greenery and not having the billboards. And so I think that all adds to it. And then of course the architecture and whatnot is very, more narrow lanes, narrow avenues. So it is a beautiful city. And the cherry blossom, there's a reason it's a tourist attraction. So
they're beautiful. The city. That makes sense though, without all the extra cement and billboards, which Houston does have.
Yeah. I mean, of course there are two different cities and different sizes completely. So a lot of that is, you probably need the freeways for accessibility in Houston, but it just makes difference. At least for me, the energy of the city just changes, not having all that frenetic concrete and cars.
Sure, all the extra. So when did you get to DC? How long ago did you get there? I mean, we're young, so obviously it was last summer, but
that's right. It wasn't that long ago. It was a recent memory. It feels like it was, yesterday. It doesn't feel like it was something like 15 plus years ago.
Yeah, don't say that.
So, it's funny. I never really put it in context until a few years after 9/11, but I moved to DC all by myself in August of 2001, 3 weeks before 9/11.
Whoa. Geeta, that's crazy. That must have been really scary and intense. It must have been intense. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it I don't know. Maybe when you're younger, things just don't seem as, you don't really you don't
Yeah.
really process things in such a holistic view, and life just kind of happens more in a linear fashion, like step by step. But I don't know if I was necessarily scared, but definitely, I mean, it clouded everything. So I moved here to start graduate school. And I went to American University, the School of International Service. So it couldn't have been more of a relevant course of study for that time period,
That's
like
awesome.
just international affairs. So
I
yeah,
can't imagine.
I had started, I was on maybe day 3 or day 4 of my new internship, which was a few blocks from the White House on the morning of 9/11. And so, yeah.
I just got goosebumps. I
Yeah.
really did. That is, wow. That is intense.
Yeah.
Okay, so were you by the White House or the Pentagon or anything the day of 9/11? Was there anything that you experienced that
Yeah.
September morning?
So I had just started my internship. I was in day 3 or day 4 of an internship, and the location was just a few blocks from the White House, probably about 3 or 4 blocks. And I was at the office that morning, and we were right next to a metro station where the office is. And somebody came out and said, as many of us probably heard, one of the towers is down, and it kind of didn't register as it did for many of us. And so at some point, I think as that hour went on, when it became evident or clear that there was something larger going on, I looked out of the window and I saw, like it's like they came out of nowhere. I saw secret police service just in full black, black gear, like guns, armor, running down the sidewalk. I mean, they were obviously going towards the White House, right? But it was just like, it's like, with those movies when they appear out of nowhere,
Yeah.
like, like
Yes.
they come out of the building. So
Yeah. You're like, where was that guy?
At one
It's always
moment,
Brad Pitt. Yeah.
yeah.
Or Bruce Willis. You're like, where was Bruce this entire time?
Yeah, they're invisible, right? Yeah, someone's
Yeah,
like flying
totally.
off the rooftop, and
Yeah,
it
exactly.
was definitely. I remember just looking out the window in this like suspended moment of watching all this happen. I'm thinking, this is DC, like this
Right, this is called Tuesday. Yeah.
it's real. It's real. So yeah, it was luckily I was living in a group house with a lot of people, so I wasn't and we had all just recently moved to DC, and it happens to be a lot of my school, like my colleagues graduate school, so we were all kind of in the same boat at that time. So yeah, that was my introduction to DC, and
Wow.
it's a
Talk
different
about
world.
baptism by fire kind of a thing. Like, it's like you're gonna sink or swim.
Yeah.
And I guess you stuck around. You fell in love with the city and you
I did,
finished your
yeah.
master's. So you have a master's in international impressiveness,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned.
That sounds a lot more appealing.
Oh, good. Because I'm impressed. So tell me, what is it, Geeta? Because for the other people who are listening that don't quite get it, not for me. I obviously understand.
Don't
Go
worry.
ahead.
I have a script to dumb it down for the layperson.
Oh, perfect. It's for them. I'm so generous.
Right. Yeah, you're just a platform for them.
I am. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Promoting understanding, right?
That's exactly right. Yes, this has zero to do with me. So
yeah. So my degree is international. My master's is international peace and conflict resolution, but it was with the focus of international development. It's more, humanitarian affairs, foreign affairs. There's lots of fancy ways to call it, but at the end of the day, it's international relations. I actually have a really funny story that you might be able to relate to this.
I'm ready.
So you know how of our generation, a lot of the Indian Americans, their parents encouraged them to pursue some very specific fields, right? Medicine or law, engineering. I think that's broadened now as the generations have grown and come along. But my mother was always quite disappointed that I never kind of followed one of those tracks. so she didn't quite understand that there was a profession in international affairs, right? And so she would ask me, well, what do I tell people that you're due, essentially, like, how do I explain it?
Yeah.
So,
If it's not a doctor, what do I
yeah,
say?
yeah, yeah. Basically, like, there's a legit profession outside of that, and
There's other jobs, Mom.
yeah, but I think especially, like, with the communities that we grew up within, right? It was like there wasn't a lot of outside tracks at the time. I mean, I think it changed very rapidly, but definitely when we were in our late teens, early 20s, it was still quite you choose from one of a few tracks. So I used to get really frustrated with my mom, like get scoffing, like I'd scoff at her. Mom, you just don't understand. And I said,
you don't get me, Mom.
Yeah, I'm so misunderstood. So I just
the emo international. I love it.
Yeah, right. International ego affair. Affairs of the international ego. So I would tell her, just tell people like just international relations, right? Because even like in Houston at the time, there really wasn't a recognition outside of political science, even for this field. So I was just tell people international relations and leave it at that. And my mom was so sweet, and she had a little sweet accent, from India, and she'd tell people, "Oh, my daughter works in international relationships,"
Oh.
And so I would scoff even more, Olivia, right? Mom, like, it's just two words. Get it right. It's not international relationships. It's international relations.
Like you're a matchmaker.
Yeah, exactly. Just
you're Match.com.
I'm already okay with you not understanding what I do, but just, the title is simple. And so then as I started working in this field, I actually realized that she was right, that it's all about relationships, right?
Oh,
it's all.
I just got goosebumps.
Your
mom was right.
My mom was right. I tell the story
that.
when I give career talks sometimes, just to point out that I think the field, like, it can sound very development, humanitarian assistance, foreign affairs. It can sound very exotic and very ambiguous at the same time. Like, what do you actually do? And a lot of it is about relationship building, which happens here in our everyday communities, and it happens on a global scale, right? At the end of the day, people are people. So I always try and remember that when I look back at where I've worked or who I've worked with, and try and remember that human connection between all of us. So
I think that's fantastic. What was your undergraduate degree in, and where did you receive that?
Creative writing, Bachelor of Arts in Creative Writing from University of Houston, actually. So,
nice.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I could see where that would be very creative, and actually, I now understand how you got to where you are today. That now makes a lot of sense, Geeta.
Put it together.
I just put it together because, again, for everyone else, obviously not for me. Please explain what it is that you now do and run, and oh my gosh, I am so excited for you to go into great detail about what this is, because your project of what you've dedicated your life to is just, and I mean this in every sense of the word, it's beautiful. So please share it with me. I can't wait to hear the gooey details.
That's really kind to hear. And, I have to say that somebody else, it was a few years ago, and I was feeling a little downtrodden about, there were some setbacks with the project. And someone also told me those exact same thing, and those exact same words, that it's a beautiful thing, and sincerely meant it. And, when people you respect give you such feedback and encouragement, I think that's really what makes it beautiful. Like, so I don't see it being me as much as me being a conduit, right, to something like that, because nothing happens in a silo, right? So anyhow, so the fact that, or alone, exactly. So the fact that you use that word beautiful, like, it reminds me of that memory of my other friend telling me the same thing. But what I'm working on and kind of focusing the majority of my efforts on is called the Global Sleepover. What the Global Sleepover is a way to teach children about the world and world cultures in a fun and engaging way. So that's kind of our pitch. But
Your
that's our little
elevator
elevator.
speech.
That's our elevator speech, which I'm still trying to perfect. And I'm not
You did
at
great.
all a performance. I'm not at all a performer. So need some work. But essentially, what we're really trying to do is promote global understanding, promote tolerance, diversity, multiculturalism in a way that's fun to kids, right? Through interactive storytelling.
Yeah. So what does that look like? How does little old me, I'm a stay-at-home mom in Houston, Texas, and I want the global sleepover to be a part of my children's, day. How do I do that, Geeta? What does that look like?
That's a good question. So we do a variety of things. We have some activity kits that we offer for kids. We also have workshops, camps, and some that are global. Some that are online and some that are in person. Obviously, now that's changing, the in-person part of it. So
because we're in quarantine currently. So
yeah,
it's having to go online.
That's right. So we bring our programs and workshops to schools, to organizations, and also through these little, what we call activity kits or activity boxes that you can order for your child at home. And it was kind of like everything evolved with the global sleepover, as anything does. And so ultimately the point in using technology for us, or in anything we're creating, is making it accessible to everyone. So it's something that
not just the elite who can afford it.
Exactly. Yeah. So
right.
It's something that we want, this type of learning to go to everybody, whether it's through school, through an individual way, for somebody that can afford it, somebody that can't. For kids in different countries, just as important to access it. So that's kind of why we have a lot of different options, and to answer your question. So
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love the name because I just see like fuzzy pajamas and popcorn and really great 80s movies, which I'm guessing is not a part of the curriculum of the global sleepover. But
it could be, right? It was definitely fueled by my love of sleepovers as a child. And we grew up in the same community, in the same high school, so definitely had a lot of sleepovers. And it's a rite of passage. Yeah. It's a rite of passage. So that's how it kind of started. So yeah.
And your colleague, who I can't wait to meet one day, I really would love to talk to him. But you have a partner in this, and he has a connection to sleepovers.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds a little weird. Not in a Michael Jackson way, in a good, healthy.
Let's rewind that.
Let's try that again, shall we?
Even the word sleepover, we always joke, we have to put it in context. It can be taken out of context.
Oh, Geeta, yes. Tell me about your partner.
Yeah. So the way everything came about with the global sleepover and the name, the title of it, I was at work one day, and I had been kind of thinking in terms of, for a while, about just like the importance of global learning. And I'm chatting with my colleague, who's this like really almost a quiet and humble person, and you wouldn't quite imagine that he has such fun stories. Like, he's not one to kind of easily share, but then every once in a while he drops something on you, right? So we were having one of those conversations in our cubes, and he was just happened to casually mention that he grew up going on sleepovers at the White House. And
in the presidential White House, or like the White House on 5th Street? What are we saying?
Right. Like, be
specific.
Is there a children's playhouse that I never heard about called the White House?
Exactly.
No, and he just casually dropped it as
like no big deal.
No big deal. Like, it was that's just his nature. He's very humble and funny at the same time. And he just kind of trotted past it, right, onto the next conversation point. And so I reined that in. Like, what exactly do you mean? And as it turned out, his father worked at the White House, and was there quite a bit in administration. And so I guess at the time it less security and easier to bring, kids with you. And so he was the same age as some of the president's family members. And so he would go with his father to the White House and end up spending the night at the White House.
As you do.
As you do.
Who doesn't?
And exactly. And getting into mischief as 12-year-olds do. And, these were all like really, like the way he was talking about them also was just very casual. But he recognized that not all kids got that opportunity. So he started telling these fun stories, and I thought, well, how fun would it be to write a children's book about your experience? Like just how cool to, from that perspective of being in the White House. Remember, this was a time before YouTube was around.
Right.
Like this was back in 2005. I mean,
no one had an iPhone.
Yeah. I sound like one of those like, people like, child, you don't know how it was back then, but
we had books.
Yeah.
And not Audible.
Right.
You had to read them yourself.
I read my books while I was walking to school in the snow, 4 miles
we had
one
libraries.
way.
I love it. That's great.
I had to go and stand in line and check out a book, but the world has become such a smaller place, and at that time it was getting smaller, right? And so
the world has become a smaller place.
True. In terms of just understanding, and if I want to check out the White House now, I can just do a quick video and find something about it, right? It wasn't as readily available back then. So even to my ears, and I had been working in this field and I had been working in embassies at that point, it was super exciting, like the White House. Wow, that's something that seems so far away and so inaccessible for me. So we started talking, and then I thought, how fun would it be to do a series where you get to do a sleepover at different locations around the world, not just the White House.
Oh, I see what you did there. That's clever. There's that creative writing degree.
So they come up with the adventures around the world. So sleepover at Easter Island, sleepover. At the time we were thinking pyramids in Egypt, sleepover. And just imagine any iconic place or any place in the world, you have a sleepover. So that's the fun story with David.
That is really
House,
great.
So, yeah.
And what I think is really interesting about your story, Geeta, is you yourself presently you don't have any children at this moment, do you?
No, not at this moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
This moment you're like, no. Tomorrow we don't know. It's a whole new day. Because
Right. I can only speak for the present.
But I love that you have focused your life and your very impressive, whether to your mother or not, career on something that's helping children. And even without having your own, because usually you hear these stories from people, it came from a place like, oh, my kids weren't getting this, or as a teacher, or something in that realm.
Yeah.
So I find that part really interesting. Why the connection with children?
That's a really good question. It's something I've never really thought about, actually, because I'm not I wasn't an educator, and like by trade, in terms of I had never taught anywhere. So teaching was something I actually kind of shied away from, so I didn't have it in me, I think. Well, I've always had good relationship with kids. Like it's always been very important for me to have children around in my life, whether it's like my friends' kids, or at the time I was very close to my goddaughter, who at that time was 5 and now almost 20 years old. So she was quite an inspiration. And actually, I think kids, the world of kids is not as inaccessible as we think it is as adults, right? So maybe that's part of it, is that it's very easy to tap into children and into that mentality, or into that spirit and that fun idea, and like taking it into a little bit more of a sober place. I think the why children question is more about education and the importance of education. And so it was right around that time in 2005, and the next 4 or 5 years after that I was building Global Sleepover, when I reconnected with my father, and to who I I think I hadn't spoken with him or seen him since I was 7, 8, something like this. And
Really? I didn't realize
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. So in high school years, I was living. We were living with our family members and relatives, but not my father wasn't there, and he had gone back to India and traveled a little bit in Africa, but he was primarily in India. So in those years, I was reconnecting with my father and kind of learning his story and his about his life. And one thing I had done a lot of research into was how my family were refugees. Both my parents' side in India in 1947. And so, long story short, when I reconnected with my father, I came to learn his story one day sitting in Delhi. And I learned this story about how he was a refugee at age 8 and had to flee. And my father grew up in refugee camps, went to government school, and he went from that place to having 5 degrees in the world and moving to America. He had four upper level degrees and one university level degree, and that was all based on his belief in the power of education and I can write this. I always a hard word for me to pronounce, but the unequivocal power of education,
Right. Yeah. Of
and
course.
how it truly changes society. And then over the years, and unfortunately he passed away now 10 years back, but over the years I learned all these stories about my father enrolling his sisters in school in 1950s in India at a time when my grandmother wanted to pull them out of school after grade 8. So
That's
we've been,
incredible.
yeah, it's such a, like, so you see what the power of education can do, right? And this is a different story, but I even, when my father was telling me this story, I looked up the name of the refugee camp that he grew up at, and it was still running as a home for widows and orphans. So we went to visit it together.
And this is in India.
In India, yeah, and almost 50 years later. And the reason I say this was that my father, when we went back there, we took donations and supplies. He hadn't been back there. It was a city or a town 6 hours north of where my father was living. So he was living in the capital in New Delhi, and this is a town 6 hours north. So he had never been back, and he went back because of me. But the one thing he did that day, and remember, I was just still getting to know him, right? Like, it wasn't as if I knew a lot about him, and he agreed to go along on this journey with me at my insistence. But just seeing him in his action there, so without even telling me, he went and he gave money to the lady that leads this particular home to pay for the education of the kids living in that home. This was in 2009.
So he covered all their costs for
Yeah.
every child that was there.
For their education. It was like something like 50 kids, and to cover their costs, to see them through high school. Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah. Isn't it extraordinary? And like I walked up to him as he was doing it, and for him, like, he never, he didn't, it wasn't like he was like, hey, let's go do this together. It was just something he just thought of right there at that moment. And, and the fact that it was, again, important to him, right? Like, that was his way of creating change, and his way of creating sustainable change is through education. So back to,
it's in your genes, it's in your blood, it's who you are.
I had already started Global Sleepover at this point, right?
Right.
And I already formulated the ideas based on addressing inequities in education, right? And not just addressing, but increasing equities in education, making
I like
education...
that, increasing equities in education.
Yeah,
that's a powerful statement. That is really exactly. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, we all talk about the problems, right? But we want to look at, like, what do you actually... So reframing it as a first step, right? Like, how are we increasing it and not focusing on the lack of?
That's beautiful. See, there's that word again. That is beautiful.
So there's whole many other stories about my connection to my father, but back to why children, I think, and education can happen at any level, right? Of course, it doesn't have to mean children, but if you give the opportunities to children, right? If you just create that framework, and as a mother, as somebody who's a supporter, as somebody like yourself who gathers people and supports people together, that like people just need the framework. They just need a little bit of that, to that guidance, and they can blossom, right? They just need that opportunity. So I think, with children, and also, it's very easy to engage a 6-year-old in a story about a sleepover at the White House.
I mean, I must be 6 because I want to know all those stories.
Yeah.
That sounds fascinating. I think that's great. Geeta, how old were you when you started the Global Sleepover, and how old were you when you reconnected with your father?
Are you trying to ask me if I had reconnected my father first before
No.
Global? Oh, you're just trying to ask the
curious as
differences?
to, how they really are separate. I mean, how old were
Yeah.
you when you successfully launched? You're like, okay, everyone can actually go in and access all the materials for Global Sleepover. It's an actual thing. It's not just on a piece of paper. Around what age were you there? And then how old were you when you reconnected with your father in India?
Sure. So my father in India was my late 20s. By the time we started having those conversations, I was around 29 and taking those trips. I took trips to India numerous times, and he unfortunately passed away when I was 32. So it was just not too many years later. In terms of my age with Global Sleepover, so it's the journey has been linear and non-linear, and it's easy to, when you talk about these stories, nothing's ever linear, and that's part of the beauty.
Never.
That's never ever. That's the secret. That's the secret. Trying to make it linear is where you come across problems, right? And
trying to make it linear is where you come across problems.
Yeah,
that is so true. Because we want A to B, little, like a very short track, and that is just not how life goes.
That's right.
And
I always believe, there's going to be lots of failure. So I would say it was around, from the time I conceptualized it to the time that I actually was like ready to here's something to show what I've been working on. There was about a 5-year period. So I was again in my 32, 33, something along those lines. It was well after my father had passed away, actually. But in those years, it wasn't that I wasn't doing anything. It was just, there was a lot of conceptualizing, piloting, taking it from one step to another, kind of looking at the landscape of what's happening in the world, what's happening with parents' education. So, yeah.
A lot of work. I can't even imagine.
So since I'm only 26, it wasn't that long.
Exactly. It's really weird. You're just aging backwards. Yes, I hear you. We have the same skincare products that we use.
Yes, that's right. We drink the same smoothies and the same juices.
Kool-Aid. Yes. Yeah. We're drinking the same Kool-Aid today. I think that that's really beautiful how you connected with what you're doing presently with your relationship with your father. And I hope this isn't out of turn to say, but the brokenness of a parent-child relationship, which I'm guessing it was broken at points, which, first of all, who doesn't have a broken relationship with their parents? Let's be honest. They happen to be humans. You're a human. It's going to be broken. And then you are living your life trying to heal a broken world with your little flashlight, your little spot, the way that you're doing it. And I think the correlation between the two is really fantastic and fascinating. And I don't know how many of us pause and look at what we're contributing today and reflecting on where it came from in our past or part of our original origin stories, our family of origin, things like that, and why we make the choices we make and go the direction that we're going. And I know for you, when I met you in school, you were often going to a Hindu temple
Yeah.
here in Houston, and you would bring me back flowers. I don't know if you remember that, and I loved it. I always say lace, and I'm like, it's not Hawaiian.
Yeah.
But they were like flower necklaces. I'm pretty sure that's also wrong to say. It has, I'm sure, a beautiful word, and I am being so uneducated.
Not at all, yeah.
But you would bring me back these beautiful flowers from
Yeah.
the temple, and I would hang them on my dresser. And they would stay there until you would bring me a new set. And then I would have these fresh, beautiful flowers that were all strung like a necklace, like a lei, like a Hawaiian lei. It looked like that, but it wasn't. But and I would have them on my dresser, and I absolutely loved that, and the fragrance. And I loved that you were so generous in sharing a piece of your spirituality at the time with me. You know, because, you know, I'm the token Catholic.
Yeah.
I'm like this, you know, like, oh, there's Liv. She's the Roman Catholic. Like, everybody knew. I didn't have to, you know, come dressed as a nun. Everyone was aware. And you were so kind to share your spirituality and let me have some of that. And I know that today you are in a different place with your spirituality. And I think that's really beautiful. And I think so many people, as we grow and change, right, it becomes more of our own. And we develop it. How did your personal spirituality, I don't know whether even then or now, whichever one you're more comfortable with, how did that play into what you're doing today with giving of your life in the way that you are in your project of the Global Sleepover?
Well, you put the question very beautifully, and I definitely remember those flowers. You know, I grew up in a very religious household, and they were obviously Hindus, and my mother, she was a devout Hindu, but she was somebody also who exposed me to many religions and many cultures. And I don't know if you remember, but she used to send us to a Bible camp at Sam Houston State University.
That's hilarious. Yeah. I do not remember that.
Yeah, I may not have mentioned it. I think it was when I right as we were going into high school, and I think because for me it was a little bit traumatizing because there weren't so many Hindus around. So it didn't. When you're a child, spirituality obviously is very different, right? So for me, it became about this identity search. Like at that time, like am I Baptist or am I Christian? Am I Hindu? I didn't really even know the difference, Christian, Catholicism, etc. So I think I always had this grounding in spirituality from this with my mother, that she always, you know, she would go to Buddhist temples, she would go to Hindu temples, and even though for her devout faith was Hinduism, she was quite open-minded and exposed us to that. I think I'm part of that generation that would say that I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. You know, and you know, once you start unpacking what that means, it can go in many directions, of course. So in terms of your question, though, it's quite interesting because there's so many stories that I want to say to kind of connect it, right? But I think the overall answer really is my spirituality is so private for me. Like private meaning it's personal, it's internal. And in the past 2 years only have I really been exploring, you know, this concept of the universe inside of you, right? Like and some people will call it God, some people will call it divinity, some people call it universe. There's a poem by John Donne, the English poet, that talks about seeing the universe in a grain of sand, right? And so it's that concept, that energy that we have within us, right? For me personally, it's God, it's a deeper spirituality, and it's the creator, whether you call the creator by whatever name it is, that to me is secondary to that energy and that faith. And so I think there's a little bit of exploring your own that universe within you and drawing on that divine intervention and that divine power. I don't know how to exactly put it, but I think every time in my life when I've just leaned into whatever was happening, right? Whatever doors are opening, whatever energies were being sent my way, when I've leaned into what I think I should be living spiritually, or, you know, you can also say what God was putting in my path, that is when things have just blossomed, right? And that's when you see something taking a life of its own, and you feel like, okay, I'm being used as a conduit towards something like this. Like, you know, some people might feel like it's a calling. Don't necessarily know if I would say it's my calling, but I definitely see that, you know, there's been certain things that have been put in my path, and I see them as being gifts from God, and I see them as being like a spiritual gift. And so if I didn't honor those, to me that would be disrespectful to my own spirituality. Does that make sense a
That
little
makes
bit?
a
It
lot
kind
of
of,
sense.
you know,
Yeah, I love
and
that. That
just,
it would be disrespectful to your own spirituality if you don't
yeah,
honor that, recognize
yeah.
it.
And, you know,
I
and
see that.
it could be, it just, in my case, I happen to have made a decision to kind of make a career shift to do this. But, you know, like, living your life and choosing what you're doing, there's so many ways to do it. There's big ways and there's small ways. And so it didn't have to be like, I didn't set out to say I'm going to make a career shift to do this. But it was one of those where I'm just going to, like, somehow this is here, and I'm just going to take the chance. And I'm telling you, like, you know, that's that saying, like, there but for the grace of God go I, right? Like, you know, I literally didn't know what I was doing. Like, the stories about how, you know, just the idiotic things I did and I said as I was building Global Sleepover, right? Trying to figure out, like, what is this energy? What is this thing that I'm trying to say? I couldn't even articulate it, right? It took me years before I could articulate it, and I still can't. But but, you know, things just happen. Things just start to fall into place. And you know, and I feel like that belief that the world is so much larger than what you know and what you think, you know, like that energy that's there, you know, we're not in control of that. It's just all kind of, that's coming from, for me at least personally, that's coming from from a divinity, a larger divine place. um Connecting the story to my father, just it's just quite interesting. I think my personal, like, you know, I look around and I see the people that I work with now, for example, or I see the people working in education, along my partners, so to speak, right? I never set out to go find them, right? They were all given to me. And just people who are just impressive blessings, even from a business perspective, right? Just people who have opened up so many doors, and they just fall into my lap, right? And I don't believe it's by coincidence. I believe it's by energy. When I reconnected with my father, I'll tell you this quick story, and then I'll let you finish. So I didn't know anything about my father. Like, I knew very little, even to the point where we have a different, he changed our last name when he came to the States. So I had heard that we might have a different last name, but I didn't even know that that was a true story or not. So this was how kind of disconnected I was, right, from this knowledge. So when I met my father and I heard his story, and I found out that in the 60s, he had left India to go to Afghanistan, to Kabul, to work as a stenographer. And at that time in Kabul, it was a booming city. Like, Delhi was a struggling capital, and people were leaving Delhi to go to Kabul for work and prosperity. And I say this to say that my father had gone to Kabul to work as a stenographer under a USAID contract. USAID is the United States Agency for International Development, which is the agency that I started working with when I finished graduate school. And not only that, my father then, he was working for a project in Kabul in the early 60s for, remember that airline Pan Am or Pan Am,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
absolutely.
So
Sure.
they were doing a big project trying to make Afghanistan a hub with
Oh, with Pan
Ariana,
Am.
with Pan Am, yes, and with the Afghan airline Ariana Airways. I think it's Ariana at the time, or something very similar to that. So my father got a free around the world ticket, and the first time he came to America was on that around the world ticket, and it was in Washington D.C. He flew straight to Washington D.C. And so and so when my father was telling me these stories, by that point I had kind of DC was where I had come to, where I come of age, right? It was my first, like, I had traveled around a little bit after Houston, obviously, but DC was my, like, if I had to leave somewhere and go somewhere and restart my life, that was DC to me. I had already been working for USAID, and I had also been working for USAID in Afghanistan myself by the time I saw my father.
And you had no idea.
No idea.
And what a very specific connection, Geeta. Like,
Yeah.
that's so you both worked for the same company, corporation, division, whatever it's called, and in the same country. Did you actually work in Afghanistan, or was that here in DC that you were working in relation to?
No, I was working in Kabul.
You were?
Myself. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wait, did he think, okay, did your dad think that was an extraordinary connection?
I don't think he could process. I think he was just so, like, he was just learning about me. He had no idea what I was doing and who I was.
Wow.
You know, so
that is phenomenal.
It was phenomenal. And it was, for me, it was so amazing because I never felt like I belonged, right? And I never felt like I had that connection with my father. And here, all of a sudden, you know, you see this, I mean, and, you know, I had been pursuing, for no reason, just this interest in humanitarian assistance. I had no idea, well, not for no reason. It was just something that was so deep within me, right? That I just I had to I studied it and I was working in it, and it was so powerful. And here my father is telling me all these stories about the partition and his family history, without me knowing any of this. Remember, I was in my late 20s, so I had already kind of, quote unquote, come to adulthood at that point. So I just bring this up just to say that I think that's the same thing that happened with Global Sleepover. Is I almost kind of felt this, like, you know, relating it back to spirituality. There was almost this, like, it's within me, and I felt that it was within me, but I didn't know what it was. But I just kind of lead into it, right? Or, for lack of a better term, right? Just kind of open your arms to it and let everything just go. So I really don't feel, and I think this is the way for a lot of people, I'm sure, right? Like, you just go by your instinct or that internal voice. Some people call it God, some people call it universe, or whatever that is within you. And so that's what I really kind of bring it back to. And even when you know, we've had some difficulties with Global Sleepover, of course, as every organization does. Even when I've had those moments where I just really feel like, what am I doing? You know, feel like everything's against me. I just kind of come back to that, right? That there's just something, it's not me, it's not, quote unquote, my idea, but it's just, I'm that conduit for this energy or for this. And the more I focus on that, the clearer it becomes.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense, Geeta. Like, what you're saying, it's almost like when you no longer fight and you just receive the message.
Yeah.
You know, that's how I see.
That's perfect. The receive the message. That's a beautiful way of saying it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I feel when you're saying leaning in. So let me ask you my one question that I told you I would ask. And here's what's becoming my favorite part of the podcast, although I am just I keep forgetting that we're actually recording this for other humans to listen to, because I'm just like sitting over here with a cup of coffee, just I could do this all day. I want to listen to everything you have. I want to hear every story. That's probably the problem. This is soon going to turn into a 17-hour show, and people are going to have to take breaks. But I mean it well. It's just fascinating. I always think I'm going to ask this question in relation to something. And then once the conversation between my guest and I happen, I quickly see that this question is meant for something else in the discussion. So at first I thought I would ask you my question in relationship to the Global Sleepover, to what you're doing. I want to ask you in relationship with your father. So what had to quiet down in your life in order for you to hear that inner voice, you say personal spirituality. For me, as you know, as a Catholic, it would be God.
Sure.
But for you, what had to quiet down in your life for you to hear that inner voice, for you to step back into a relationship with your father, to reconnect with him? What had to quiet down for you to then walk into that space again?
That's a very different answer than in relation to Global Sleepover.
Yes.
In relation for my father, um, I think experience, what had to quiet down is my ego. And by that, like, I'm just choosing one word, but by that I mean, when I feel like ego, it's like everything from those feelings of not belonging, right, to, and not feeling wanted, which, we all feel for different reasons, I'm sure, to some degree. So, but or then your ego about who you are, your identity, yourself, the good and the bad, right? So, once all of that quieted down and I could see myself as almost a larger being than these negative and positive influences, even in my own mind, then I was able to kind of put myself second, right, and see the larger picture. And so I like to refer to it as like transcending almost, right? And for lack of a better term, again, I don't know how to quite eloquently put it, but sometimes I like to envision myself, and this is actually a little trick, a little game that we do with Global Sleepover also is, I'll envision myself seated. Okay, so I'm seated in this chair, right, in this room, in this house, which is in the neighborhood of Washington D.C., right, and then I like to zoom out mentally, right. So I zoom out. Okay, DC's bordered by Virginia and Maryland. DC's on the east coast of the United States, next to the Atlantic Ocean. La 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 la. And then before you see it, then I'm zooming out and I'm looking down on the earth, right, as a globe and as a universe, and I'm just that tiny speck, right, down there. So, and we played the similar game at Global Sleepover where we tell the kids, well, where did you wake up this morning? And my bed. Some will joke, I fell asleep, I fell on the floor, so I woke up on the floor. Some kids get really funny. I went to sleep in my sister's room last night.
Right.
So
I love it.
and once they catch on to the game, I woke up in my bathtub, but honey, I really don't think your mother let you sleep in a bathtub. But
I love it.
So we
So
play.
cute.
So it's really fun. Like, so we place them. The idea with this game is to help them envision themselves as a member of their community and then a member of the global community, right? So they're local and global. So we do the same thing where we zoom out, right? We zoom out from their home and their neighborhood, and so they can see themselves as part of their city. But then also, well, where's your city located, and what state, and what country? And they see how we're all interconnected. So I think that's what I was trying to say by when I can see myself from this zoomed out perspective, right? Then these little things that mess up, that kind of come in the way of our ego, they're inconsequential, or they become more insignificant. And then I think I was able to I was relentless about reconnecting with my father. Relentless. There's so
That's great.
the stories are, I was just driven by this. I have to get to know him, right? Like,
I'm so
I
happy
have
for
this,
you.
yeah, just, you just have this feeling, like, and I had, and really, he also was resistant at first, because I think it was very painful for him. Well, I know it was very painful for him. And so
Sure.
it was quite a difficult journey. So I think once I could see, I could see myself, out of that ego, then all these, you have empathy, you have compassion, right? Then I was able to, like, I still don't hold any anger against my father, right? And that's my own way of looking at the situation and circumstances. But I think it's much easier to experience, and I would rather have, like, now I knew my father, I met him as an adult, rather than, not rather than paying attention to my ego and saying, well, he knows where I am, you know, he's the one that left, right?
I
He can
love
come
that,
find me.
right.
So at least for me, that was worth it. But your sense
Almost
of self
yeah.
and your sense of identity, right? I almost had to kind of quiet that in order for me to go to reconnect with my father.
Even your pain, even having to quiet your pain in order to step into a relationship with this man who I am very grateful as your friend that you reconnected and that you got some really beautiful, again, that word with you, stories that are connecting to what you're doing today. And obviously it's not a mistake as to where you've gone into your life. And I hope your mother sees how, you know, both your parents, that they consider you successful, even though you didn't go in a medical field, that you have reached an international relationship success, which I think is just glorious and something we don't have enough of. And I just thank you for doing. So where can people, Geeta, where can people find information about what you do?
How fun. So we, this is the part I'm supposed to get better at promoting or
You're doing
sharing.
Great.
So we'll
type it all in the show notes. You're doing fantastic.
So you can come to our website, www.globalsleepover.com. We're also quite active on Facebook. And so it's facebook.com/Global Sleepover. I think those are the two places right now, but our website is, of course, the main place to come and find out and to engage. And we always love new ideas, new communities, new connections. And also, you know, we have a lot of fun things coming up that we have planned, especially in the changing environment with redesigning education and looking at, I think this current pandemic, if I may just quickly follow up with this current pandemic has really highlighted the inequities in education in a way that nothing else has been able to. Everything
That's a
from
very good point.
Yeah, everything from quality of education to why different children go to school. To teach inequities for teachers also, not just, you know, for parents, how parents work in the system, digital inequities. So it has never been unfortunately and sadly, you know, the circumstances that brought us here are sad, but it has never been a more relevant time for our work than now, with Global Sleepover, with really making education accessible, planning for the future. And so we are redesigning a lot of what we offer in a way that we can make it more accessible in this new era of education, the new future after the pandemic. So.
Oh, I love that. I you know, I'm a fan of your work, and I hope everyone checks it out, especially since a lot of us are still at home. No matter when you're listening, it doesn't matter, because education is important, and what you're doing is it's classic. It's never going to go out of style to try to bring people together. So thank you for that, Geeta. This conversation has been extraordinary. Blows my mind. I love you to pieces as much as I always have. If I ever get to continue to do this, would you come back and be a guest again?
Oh, I would love to. No, thank you.
Yay,
I'm glad this is only audio, not video, because you're making me tear up. But really, thank you. Like you have a wonderful presence about you, and there's something so comforting in the way that you ask questions and that you care, and it's really appreciative. I was telling you earlier, it's so natural and it's so authentic. So thank you for having the vision to draw out the gems, right?
Thank you. Really, I appreciate that. Well, there's a lot of gems inside of you to get to. So, and you were so kind to share. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully, if I ever get back to DC when the pandemic's over, we will have to go look at those cherry blossoms together. But friend, thank you. And I'm sending you all the love, and I'll talk to you soon.
Good luck to you. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Talk to Me with Liv Harrison, the stories behind their success. I really hope you come back, because I am so excited about this podcast launching. please make sure that you're subscribing. I would love for you to share on social media, share with your colleagues, your friends. If you could leave me a review or even a rating, especially on Apple Podcasts, I would be ever so grateful. Here's the deal. These next few weeks, as I build up an audience, it's really important for me to get those ratings and reviews and subscriptions. So please share and please do those things. I really promise that I'm going to bring you fantastic content and you're not going to want to miss my next guest. I sure know that. So until next time, I'll wait for you right here. Bye.